At my daughter's wedding, I reached for the chair they'd set for me. White wood, ribboned in ivory, and it wasn't there. It wasn't a mistake. It was pulled. My knees buckled. My back hit polished marble so hard the music snapped in half. Forks froze in mid-air. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed. The chandelier above me blurred into a bright, fractured star. "Careful, old man," Damien Cross said, one hand still on the chair he'd yanked away. His cufflinks winked like the joke was expensive. "Your place is on the floor." A ripple of laughter skittered around the tables, nervous, then quiet when it realized what it sounded like. I didn't curse. Didn't spit. Didn't give him anything he could polish into a story for later. I planted my palm on the cold stone, felt the sting in my shoulder, and breathed until the room stopped tilting. 60 years has taught me how to stand up when life is rooting for you to stay down. I set the chair upright myself, the legs scraping a hard line across the silence, and sat. I kept my eyes off Damien and put them where they belonged, on my daughter. Clara's bouquet tipped in her hand. Pale roses spilled like a small storm across the aisle. Her face had the color of paper held to a window. Her mouth opened, closed. No sound. In her eyes I saw the war you can't fight for someone else, love sharpening itself against shame. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from, because what came next turned the day, and my life, inside out. The officiant cleared his throat, twice, dragging ceremony back onto its feet. The string quartet found a safer song. Waiters moved like ghosts, refilling glasses that no one touched. People stared at their napkins, or at the ceiling, or anywhere but me. Embarrassed for themselves, not me. That's how cruelty works when it wears a tuxedo. Everyone hopes it's a misunderstanding they can ignore. Damien stood with his shoulders thrown back like a photograph of victory. He leaned toward a table of friends and let a sentence slither out on a whisper. His smile was a blade he'd learned to hide in charm. I slid my chair in, squared my back, and kept my voice in my chest where it belonged. You learn in the service that restraint isn't weakness. It's aim. The doors at the back of the hall opened. Footsteps, measured, heavy, sure, crossed the marble. Every soldier knows that sound even out of uniform. I didn't turn. Not yet. The air shifted anyway, a tide drawing breath. The man who'd just arrived stopped several feet from me. I felt him before I saw him. A presence, posture straight enough to carry the weight of years without bending. "Captain Hale," he said, his voice catching on the rank like it had been kept in a drawer. "Is that you?" Everything in the room leaned toward us. The quartet's bows hovered. Champagne went flat in glasses. Clara looked from me to the man and back again, confusion sparking into a fear that had nothing to do with falling. Damien's smile trembled, almost invisible, like a wire in wind. I lifted my eyes. Richard Cross. Gray at the temples now, but the face was the same one I'd seen once under a sky too loud with metal. His tux couldn't hide the way he stood, heels anchored, eyes scanning for the thing that didn't belong. Me or his son, he hadn't decided. I rose, slow enough to make the choice mine. "Mr. Cross," I said. He took a breath that seemed to find 20 years all at once. A hand moved as if to offer itself, then stopped. Too much audience. Too much history. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant said, his smile soldered on, "shall we, continue?" The murmur resumed. Not conversation. Cover. People crave a script when the truth walks in without one. Clara took a step toward me and then stopped, torn between two altars. The one with flowers. And the one with memory. She whispered, "Dad." The way a child says it when she's trying not to cry in front of company. "I'm good, kiddo," I said, and the lie was small enough to survive. Damien tugged his jacket, rebuckled his mouth into charm, and slid an arm around Clara's waist. "Let's not turn a stumble into a scene," he said under his breath. To me, barely moving his lips, "Try to keep up." I didn't answer. Men like him hunt reaction. Deny it, and they wander. The vows stumbled forward. Words about forever and for worse and for better. Pretty sentences. Thin walls. I heard them like static through the rush in my ears, the old training rising on its own. Count the exits, clock the faces, mark the friend who might become an ally and the ally who might already be a danger. I felt for the chain under my shirt, Anna's ring warm against skin. I've always kept my promises, even the ones no one hears. When it came time for toasts, the head table glittered like a jewelry case. I was at 12. Far enough that your applause arrives late. On purpose. A placement is a message when the ink's linen. A young cousin talked too long. A groomsman tried a joke and found no landing. Then someone waved me over, an old neighbor of Clara's who'd driven in from Brooklyn. I stood, slid my chair back with care, and reached for it to sit again when he finished his story. My fingers met air. I didn't fall this time. Not all the way. But the jolt went up through my spine like electricity, and a hush that had been pretending not to be fear finally said its name. Damien's hand still hovered where the chair had been. He made a shape of surprise with his eyebrows. 2 for 2, Captain, he said lightly, just loud enough for the nearest tables. We'll get you a walker on the registry. That's when Richard moved. His chair pushed back with the only honest sound in the room. He walked the aisle between the tables without a smile, without a word, without asking permission the way men who've earned it don't need to. He stopped between me and his son and looked at Damien the way a man looks at a crack in a dam he poured himself. Put the chair back, he said. Damien laughed, soft enough to sound civilized. Dad, relax. It's a joke. Richard didn't blink. A joke stops when one person isn't laughing. For a second, I saw a boy in Damien's face, the one who'd learned to hide from this tone. Then the mask was back, the expensive one. He slid the chair toward me with 2 fingers. The scrape sounded like a confession. I sat. Not because he offered it. Because I chose to. Around us, people exhaled into their napkins. The MC tried to save the shape of the evening, snapping the room back with a clap and a line he'd written for a different crowd. The band obeyed. The lights softened obediently. The machine wanted to hum again. Clara's eyes were wet, fixed on me the way a lifeguard watches the sea. She mouthed, "I'm sorry." I shook my head once. You don't apologize for what you didn't break. Richard didn't return to his seat. He stayed where he was, hands at his sides, scanning Damien like a man listens for a rattle in an engine he rebuilt and doesn't recognize anymore. He looked at me, not quite a nod, but the outline of one. A message, "I see you." Another, "I remember." The next toast was mercifully short. The one after that vanished while I counted the beats of my heart against the ache in my shoulder. When the MC finally released the room to photographs in the garden, the guests scattered in pastel swirls and relief. Champagne fountains hissed. The photographer barked names like a drill sergeant who'd traded boots for brogues. I didn't follow the stream. I took the side door out to the colonnade, the shadowed space where the music was a rumor and the air smelled like rain threatening money. I ran a hand over the throbbing joint in my shoulder and flexed my fingers until the stiffness gave me back their shape. These hands have held wrenches and caskets and a newborn girl who thought motor oil was the smell of home. They don't shake for the amusement of a boy in a tailored suit. The door opened behind me. The footfall was familiar now. Richard. He stood beside me without looking, the way soldiers do when words need room to find the right order. "I should have been here sooner," he said. "It wouldn't have changed who he is," I said. He nodded once, the admission of a father who's been keeping a ledger. "You're Hale," he said, quieter. Fob echo. The night the convoy burned. I didn't say yes. He didn't need me to. His voice thinned. "You carried men through a river of fire. One of them was me. Memories aren't movies. They arrive as heat and sound. Diesel and screaming metal. The weight of another man's life in your arms when your legs don't believe you can stand. And the voice in your head saying, 'Move or both of you die.' The past doesn't buy the present," I said. "No," Richard said. He looked at the ballroom through the glass, at his son in a ring of friends, laughing like gravity owed him a debt. "But it can explain it. And it can warn it." We stood like that, 2 men. The room had tried to shrink, not speaking because the next words would ask us both to pick a side and live there. Then the photographer called the Cross family to the lawn, and the spell broke. "Captain," he began. "Edward," I said. "Edward," he repeated, as if it cost less. "This isn't over." "Things like this never are," I said. He left by the same door he'd come through, back into the light that wanted to pretend nothing ugly could live in it. I watched him go and felt the strange relief of being seen by someone who didn't need a translation. I turned to follow at a distance, back toward the garden where Clara would be standing under an arch too heavy with flowers, where she would be asked to smile until her cheeks lied. I put my hand to the chain under my shirt and pressed the ring against my sternum like a seal on a letter I hadn't yet sent. Inside, Damien raised a glass, his grin slick with the sheen of a man who thinks victory is a mirror. A server nearly collided with him and apologized like he'd stepped on a king's foot. He didn't notice the way people glanced toward the door where Richard had vanished. He didn't notice the tremor that had started in his world, barely there, the kind you only feel if you've lived through earthquakes and learned to read floors. I did. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive like a gavel. Sometimes it begins with a chair. And sometimes it enters a room on the heels of boots you haven't heard in 20 years, and calls you by a name you thought you'd packed away with your medals. "Captain Hale," a voice said behind me again, not Richard this time. I turned, and the person standing there made the chandeliers dim. I didn't sleep the night of Clara's wedding. The bruise on my shoulder ached, but that wasn't what kept me awake. It was Damien's voice, looping in my head like a record I couldn't stop. "Your place is on the floor." I've carried heavier words before. I've been called things by men with rifles that would make marble crack. But humiliation in front of strangers, at the moment my daughter was supposed to feel proud, hit a different vein. At dawn, I was already in the garage. The old roll-up door groaned as sunlight painted dust across the floor. My Harley sat in the middle like a question I'd been too stubborn to answer. I had been rebuilding it for years, never rushing, always telling myself I'd finish when the time was right. Maybe now was the time. I cracked my knuckles, slid on the overalls, and let the wrench find my hand. The rhythm of work steadied me. Tighten, release, wipe. The smell of oil and steel was church to me. But no matter how hard I tried to drown it in grease and sweat, the memory of last night kept breaking through. The laughter. The silence. Clara's bouquet slipping from her hand. On the wall above the workbench hung photographs, faded, curling at the edges. Clara at 6, legs swinging in the blue chair I had built her out of scrap pine. Clara on her first bike, helmet too big, eyes wide with triumph. Clara in her graduation gown, cap crooked, my arms slung around her shoulder. And in the middle, Anna, in her wedding dress. Her smile, bright enough to warm a winter field. I touched the frame with fingers still blackened from grease. "I promised you," I whispered. I promised I'd protect her. The promise burned hotter now, because I wasn't just protecting Clara from life's cruelties. I was protecting her from the man she had chosen to marry. My phone buzzed on the bench. A notification. I rarely checked it. Clara had set it up so I could see her travel photos, but this wasn't from her. Someone had tagged me. I tapped. A photo filled the screen. Damien, slick in a tuxedo, glass in hand, smirking like the room belonged to him. The caption underneath sliced clean. "She's perfect. Sweet. Trusting. And her father, just a simple man." Simple man. I set the phone down slowly, because my instinct was to crush it in my fist. I stared at my hands instead. Scarred, calloused, swollen knuckles from winters of fighting bolts that didn't want to move. These weren't the hands of a simple man. These were the hands that had built a life when life tried to tear it down. When Clara was 6 and Anna had just passed, everyone told me to remarry. They said a little girl needed a mother. They were wrong. She needed stability. She needed to know one pair of hands would always be there. Steady, unyielding, hers. Those same hands now clenched around a rag, tightening until the cloth tore. I knew cruelty when I saw it. It never stops at a chair. It tests. It takes. It strips layer by layer until you don't recognize yourself in the mirror. That evening, Clara came by the garage. She always came unannounced, the way she had since she was little. Her voice carried before her steps. "Dad, you in here?" I wiped my palms and stepped from behind the Harley. She stood in the doorway, hair tied back, eyes tired but glowing in a way that reminded me of Anna. "Hey, princess," I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She crossed the room and hugged me tight. The perfume she wore was the same as her mother's. It was like Anna had walked in for a second. "You missed more of the reception last night," she said softly. "People noticed." "Crowds aren't for me," I shrugged. She pulled back, searching my face. "You're not angry, are you?" "I've been through worse," I said. She didn't look convinced. Her lips trembled like she wanted to defend him but couldn't. Finally, she whispered, "He was just nervous." "Damien doesn't always know how to," she trailed off. I put my hands on her shoulders, firm but gentle. "Clara, was he nervous, or was he testing us?" Her eyes widened. The words struck somewhere deep, somewhere she'd been avoiding. "I didn't push. I didn't need to." Sometimes a seed of doubt is stronger than a sermon. She hugged me again, tighter this time. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Princess," I whispered into her hair. When she left, the garage felt heavier. The silence pressed. But I knew I had done what I needed to. I had left her with a question she couldn't unhear. That night, I couldn't shake Damien's words. Simple man. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the ring I wore around my neck, Anna's ring. I whispered to the photograph on the mantel, "He thinks respect can be bought. That power is louder than love. That my daughter can be owned." I looked around the house. The worn couch where Clara once fell asleep with homework on her lap. The dining table where we ate spaghetti on paper plates because that's all I could afford some nights. The cracked tile by the sink where her tiny feet used to tap out rhythms while I cooked. This wasn't wealth. But it was real. It was love turned into shelter. A knock at the door startled me. Not a knock, pounding. Heavy. Urgent. I froze. Nobody visits unannounced at that hour. I flicked on the porch light. The figure outside made my stomach clench. Damien. Perfect coat, perfect hair, face twisted with something rawer than his polished charm. I opened the door slowly. He shoved past me, cologne trailing like smoke. His shoes struck the hardwood like gunfire. "We need to talk," he snapped. "About what?" I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Don't play dumb." His voice was sharp, too loud. "Clara's been different since the dinner. She's asking questions. She's doubting me. I know you've been poisoning her against me." I told her what I observed. Nothing more, nothing less. He paced the living room, fists clenched. "You'll call her tomorrow. You'll apologize. You'll tell her you overreacted." He jabbed a finger toward me. "Or you'll lose her permanently." I didn't move. Didn't blink. "Or what?" He faltered, just for a second. His face flushed red. "You think you can scare me with that mechanic act? One call, one text. I tell her you threatened me. I tell her you're jealous. Who will she believe? Her fiancé, or her bitter old father?" I shifted my stance. Didn't raise my hand, didn't raise my voice. Just let him feel it, that steadiness men like him can't fake. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said, though his voice cracked on the words. "Clara is mine. She chose me." "Clara isn't property," I said. "She doesn't belong to anyone." He spun, stormed out, and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. The house fell silent again. I walked to the mantel, lifted Anna's photograph, and whispered to her smile. "I promised." The promise wasn't broken. It was just beginning. 3 nights after the wedding, Clara called with a voice that tried to sound light and landed somewhere near brave. "Dad, Damien wants the 3 of us to have dinner. Just us. He thinks it would be good for you two to reset." Reset. That's what people call it when they want the past to pretend it didn't happen. Text me the time and place, I said. I pressed the navy suit I keep for beginnings and endings. Graduations, funerals, the day Clara signed her first lease. The elbows had gone shiny. The cuffs had been turned once and pressed hard. I threaded Anna's ring back under the collar and let the chain find its old groove against my sternum. On the subway into Manhattan, I watched my reflection in the window. Gray at the temples, lines that work had carved, a mechanic's hands folded to keep from balling into fists for problems hands can't fix. The Aurelia room glowed like a chandelier had fallen and shattered into 1,000 small lamps. A doorman with white gloves opened the door with a smile that knew he was part of the performance. The smell of truffle and polished wood did the rest. Clara waved from a corner table. She was radiant in a simple black dress, the kind that makes the room look overdressed. Her smile wobbled when she saw me, because love knows which mask you're wearing and when it's about to slip. Damien stood just late enough to be noticed. His handshake was cool and carefully brief, the kind of contact that satisfies etiquette without admitting respect. "Edward," he said, letting my first name sit on his tongue like something he'd taste and judge. "Damien." Before the menus arrived, he lifted 2 fingers at a sommelier hovering within range. "We'll start with the 09 Bordeaux," he said, not asking anyone at the table what they wanted. "Decant it." "Water for me," I said. Clara's eyes flicked to mine. Gratitude, apology, warning, all in a second. Damien's smile warmed 2 degrees. "Of course," he said. "Different tastes. Different generations." The sommelier poured. The music hummed. The floor staff floated. The city had perfected this kind of scene. Nothing sharp except the knives. "Clara tells me you rebuild motorcycles," Damien said when the small talk had run out of places to hide. "Hands-on work. Must be satisfying." "I fix what's broken," I said. "How refreshing." He laced his fingers like a man about to deliver a verdict. "I'm in portfolio management. We build futures. Select, allocate, optimize." He gave the verbs a little polish, as if they were worth more now. "Different world, I suppose. Different doesn't mean better." Clara squeezed my hand under the table, a warning to keep the water level below flood. Damien leaned back. "Tell me, Edward, what would you say is your greatest achievement?" His tone was friendly. His eyes were a ledger. "Raising Clara." The answer was there before he finished the question. "Raising my daughter," I said. "Admirable," he said, and made the word sound like a smaller trophy. "Single parenthood must have been challenging. Limited resources. No wonder Clara appreciates what I can provide now. Stability. Standards." Clara's glass trembled against the linen. "Damien." "What?" "I'm acknowledging your father's sacrifices." He tilted his head toward me, benevolent. "And recognizing we've moved beyond them." The waiter arrived with our plates, art assembled to look like food. I cut into mine slowly. Damien didn't bother pretending to taste. He preferred the sound of himself. "Brooklyn," he said, turning the word into geography he'd outgrown. "So authentic. The sense of community must compensate for the limitations." "What limitations?" My voice stayed level, but the fork handle found the ridge in my palm where a wrench lived most days. He smiled wider. "Oh, nothing specific. Just once you've experienced certain standards, simpler pleasures can feel quaint." He glanced at Clara. "That's generational, I think." "Dad appreciates nice things," Clara said, quick. "Of course he does," Damien said, floating over her words. "We all do. We simply redefine what qualifies." He rested his wrists on the edge of the table, cufflinks catching the light like small, expensive moons. "I'm glad we're doing this," he said to me. "Ritual matters. The transition between families should be civilized. Expectations clear. Expectations." "That a father releases his daughter," he said gently, as if explaining etiquette to a child, "and trusts the man who will take it from here." Clara set her knife down too carefully. Damien. He lifted his hands, a theater of innocence. Merely tradition. The waiter materialized, as if summoned by the word. He placed a leather folder by Damien's elbow, discreet as a secret. Damien opened it, scanned the numbers with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and slid it across the table to me. "The bride's father," he said softly. "It would mean a lot to Clara." The number glared. Not ruinous. Not small. The kind of bill designed to remind a man his lane has a painted line. "Damien, that isn't necessary," Clara said, color draining. "Nonsense, darling." He kept his gaze on me. "Your father wants to show support. Don't you, Edward?" Silence stretched. Not because I didn't have words. Because sometimes dignity arrives simplified, yes or no. I took out my wallet. It's smooth from years of friction, receipts, paychecks, photographs of a life built in small increments. My hands shook a little, not from fear. From the effort it takes to keep pride in its place and not let it climb into anger's seat. "It's fine, kiddo," I said. The waiter whisked the folder away. I wrote the tip carefully. Dignity has a cost. Sometimes you pay retail. "Thank you for dinner," Damien said brightly, as if he'd done me a favor. This felt healing. We stood. My chair scraped a sound no chandelier could soften. Outside, the night snapped cold and honest. Yellow cabs coughed and moved. The city performed indifference the way only a place with 8 million lives can. "Get some rest," Damien said, shrugging into his coat. "We have fittings in the morning." He kissed Clara's temple in a gesture that looked practiced. "I'll call the car." He stepped away, phone already in hand, his voice lowering as he crossed to the curb. I didn't mean to listen. But some sentences don't care where they land. "No, it's on track," he said into the phone. "She's exactly what I said, sweet, trusting. The father, harmless. A simple man. It's an acquisition, not a rescue." Yes, after the ceremony. Clara's fingers dug into my sleeve. She hadn't heard. The traffic threw the words back at me and swallowed them before they reached her. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above the city. "I'm sorry. For what you didn't do." I shook my head. "No." Her eyes searched my face for something to hold. Permission, maybe, to believe her own doubt. "He's trying," she whispered, as if saying it would make it true. "Or he's performing," I said. Hard to tell with men who've rehearsed longer than they've lived. Damien turned back, phone sliding into his pocket like a blade into a sheath. "Car's here," he said. "Clara." She hugged me quickly, too quickly, the way you do when you need 2 arms to say what your mouth can't. "Good night." "Good night, princess." They slid into the back seat. The door closed with a hush that sounded expensive. As the car pulled away, Clara looked back once. Not long. Long enough. I started down 5th on foot. Neon smeared the pavement where it found last night's rain. A bus roared past and left me in a quiet that felt earned. At the corner, a man came out of a bar with the slow shoulders of someone who carries other people's secrets for a living. He looked left, looked right, and almost walked into me. Then he stopped, blinked, and his mouth tilted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'll be damned," he said. "Hail, Martin." 25 years collapsed and left 2 men on a sidewalk with the same bones and different scars. He laughed once, short. "You look like a man who could use coffee that tastes like punishment." We stepped inside. The bar pretended to be a library. Dark wood. Lamps with green shades. Conversations that knew how to keep their voices dressed. Martin ordered a bourbon for himself and an unambitious coffee for me. "You still turning wrenches?" he asked. "Still turning," I said. "You still turning depositions into confessions?" "Still turning." He studied me over the rim of his glass. "What's the weight?" I told him the short version. The chair at the wedding. The look on Richard Cross's face when he said my rank out loud like it belonged to the room. The dinner. The bill. The phone call on the curb and the word that stuck like a thorn. Acquisition. Martin listened the way good lawyers and good friends do, without interrupting the confession they asked for. He set his glass down. Men like Cross the Younger don't stop until someone stops them. The trick is not to swing. It's to watch him load the gun and then ask the room if they all saw it, too. Meaning. Gather. Confirm. Keep your powder dry. He tilted his head. You're not fighting a man. You're fighting his story about himself. I'm not trying to win a courtroom, I said. I'm trying to keep my daughter from marrying a mirror. He nodded. Then make sure she sees what it reflects. I wrapped both hands around the coffee as if heat could crawl backward into bones. There's something else, I said, and the words felt heavier now that I was going to free them. Richard. He remembers me. FOB Echo. Martin's eyebrows climbed. That's not a small card to have in your pocket. It's not a card, I said. It's a night I'd trade if trading worked. Understood. He leaned in. Also understood, gratitude has a half-life, but it still throws light. If the father's not blind, he's a fault line. We sat with that until silence did what it does, sorted the pieces by the shape they'd take later. I thought of Clara's hand shaking against crystal. Of Damien's voice saying acquisition like love is a spreadsheet. Of Richard's jaw when he told his son to put the chair back. Martin tapped the bar with 2 fingers. I can make a couple of calls, he said. Quiet ones. Compliance folks talk when you let them think it was their idea not to. Don't set anything on fire, I said. I don't light matches, Martin said. I collect smoke. He slid a napkin across the wood. On it, a name and a number. If you hear anything you can't unhear, call me before you do anything you can't undo. Outside, the city remembered it was winter and put a hand on my shoulder to prove it. Martin clapped the other one. Keep your aim, Captain, he said. Edward, I said. He grinned. Old habits. We parted at the corner. He disappeared into a cab that looked like all the others. I walked toward the subway with my collar up and my head full of gears. On the platform, a busker sawed a song out of a violin that was mostly duct tape. People pretended not to listen and gave money anyway. The train arrived as a wind, then a noise, then a thing you trust to carry you home. Back in Brooklyn, the air smelled like the bakery that starts at 4 a.m. because bread doesn't care about ambition. I let myself into the house and stood in the dark living room for a minute before turning on any lights. The old clock ticked as if it had been wound by a man who believes tomorrow is a promise you keep, not a thing you're owed. I took the tin box from the cabinet above the fridge and set it on the kitchen table. I wrote Aurelia room, phone call, acquisition on a scrap of paper and slid it inside with the napkin Martin had given me. I closed the lid and turned the key. The ring on the chain under my shirt was warm again. I put my palm flat against it. He's not going to stop, I told the air, Anna, the house, the past. So I won't either. My phone buzzed on the counter. A number I didn't recognize. I let it go once, twice, and then I answered. Mr. Hale, a voice said, careful and direct. This is Eleanor Cross. We haven't met properly. I think it's time we did. The line went quiet enough to hear the clock step into the next second. Tomorrow, she said. 11. I'll send the address. She hung up. The message arrived a heartbeat later. Upper East Side. A townhouse older than any money it currently held. I stood in the kitchen with the phone still warm in my hand and felt the floor tilt, not like the fall at the wedding, but like a ship turning toward weather on purpose. Sometimes a trap is a dinner check in a leather folder. Sometimes it's an invitation to tea. Eleanor Cross lived in a townhouse that felt like it belonged to another century. Dark wood, oil paintings of unsmiling ancestors, and curtains that kept the light out as if daylight itself might reveal too much. She opened the door herself, no maid, no assistant, just a woman who clearly believed in keeping her own counsel. Mr. Hale, she said, her tone clipped but not unkind. I'm grateful you came. Please. Inside, she gestured to a sitting room lined with shelves. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the air. Eleanor wasn't a woman who wasted words. Her eyes, sharp and deliberate, gave the impression she had already measured me against the man her nephew pretended to be. "I know why you're here," she said, pouring tea into cups that looked as fragile as promises. "And I know what Damien has already shown you." I stayed silent. Soldiers learn that sometimes silence says more than a speech. Eleanor set her cup down with a click. "He has always been clever. Too clever. But cleverness without kindness is a dangerous thing. Even as a boy, he cheated games to win. As a man, he manipulates people to stay winning. Our family tolerated it. His father looked away. But I won't. Especially not now." Her face softened slightly. "Clara seems like a good soul. She doesn't deserve to be consumed by him." That was the first time in days I felt the weight in my chest shift. "You're the first of his family to admit that," I said. "Because the rest prefer comfort over truth." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "He doesn't see your daughter as a partner. He sees her as leverage. An asset. Something to manage. Something to show off. Something he can discard once he thinks she's no longer useful." The word cut almost as deep as the one I'd overheard outside the Aurelia room: acquisition. Eleanor rose and crossed to a cabinet. When she returned, she placed a folded paper on the table between us. "You should see this. A list of investments made in Damien's name. Reckless bets, questionable partners. Deals that nearly collapsed. If Clara ties herself to him legally, she ties herself to this rot. When it crumbles, she will be pulled down with him." I unfolded the paper. The numbers told a story anyone who has ever fought to keep the lights on would recognize. The story of a man gambling with money that wasn't his, certain he would never be the one to pay. I folded it back, slipped it into my jacket. "Why are you showing me this?" Her eyes softened in a way that made her look older, but gentler. "Because I couldn't forgive myself if I stayed silent. Better she faces the pain of truth now than the ruin of discovery later. Protect her, Mr. Hale. Even if it means breaking her heart." We sat in silence for a long moment. The clock on her mantel ticked the same way the one in my living room did, relentless, steady, each beat a reminder that time doesn't wait for anyone to find courage. When I left the townhouse, the April air cut sharp, almost bracing. The city roared around me, horns, sirens, heels striking sidewalks, but none of it drowned out Eleanor's words. That evening at the bakery, Mrs. Rodriguez leaned across the counter and whispered, "Your daughter's fiancé was bragging again. Said Brooklyn was a place you outgrow." He laughed when he said it. The next day at the hardware store, a neighbor stopped me between aisles. He glanced around before speaking. "Word is, he called Clara an investment. Like she's a stock option." He shook his head. "Can you imagine?" Every whisper chipped another piece from Damien's mask. Every word confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't love. It was possession dressed in silk. That night, Clara came by. She dropped her bag by the door, curled into the armchair across from me, and looked smaller than she had since she was a teenager. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think he's cruel?" I didn't answer right away. She needed to hear her own question echo in the room. Finally, I asked, "Was he nervous that night? Or was he testing us?" Her hands twisted together, restless, her knuckles pale. "I don't know anymore." I leaned forward. "Then look closer. The truth doesn't hide. It waits." Her eyes filled but didn't spill. She nodded, once, slow. A signal that the seed of doubt had not just been planted. It was beginning to root. When she left, the silence of the house returned heavier than before. I walked to the mantel, laid a hand against Anna's photograph, and whispered the promise again. Better a shattered illusion than a shattered life. The days after Eleanor's warning blurred into one another, but the whispers only grew louder. Every errand I ran in Brooklyn carried a new piece of Damien's shadow. At the bakery, Mrs. Rodriguez whispered about hearing him call working people failures. At the hardware store, a man muttered that Damien joked about trading Clara in if she didn't fit his plans. Each rumor was a stone added to the pile, too heavy for anyone with a conscience to carry. I tried to stay steady. The garage helped. Wrench, wipe, tighten. Repetition. A soldier's rhythm, even if the war now was made of words, lies, and illusions. But no amount of grease under my nails could clean the sickness in my chest. My daughter was walking blind into a trap, and I was running out of time to stop her. One evening, Clara showed up unannounced. She always did, but this time she looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slumped like she was carrying weight she didn't know how to name. "Dad," she said softly, "can I stay here tonight?" "Of course, princess." She sat at the kitchen table, twisting the engagement ring on her finger. He was angry tonight. Not at me, at his cousin. We were having dinner, and Damien snapped. He called him weak for not making partner yet. Said people who stay in middle-class neighborhoods are failures. Everyone went quiet. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. He sounded like a stranger. I reached across the table, covered her hand with mine. Or maybe he sounded like who he's been all along. Her lip trembled. What if you're right? What if I've been blind? Love isn't blind, I said gently. It just chooses to see the best. That's not weakness, it's your strength. She broke then, sobs shaking her frame. I held her the way I had when she was a child, when scraped knees or nightmares felt like the end of the world. She cried into my chest, and I whispered the only truth I knew. You're not alone. You'll never be alone. When she finally calmed, there was a knock at the door. Not Damien's pounding, this one was measured, almost hesitant. Clara opened it. Standing there was Eleanor. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, stepping inside with the authority of someone who had already made up her mind. But I couldn't stay silent any longer. Clara blinked. "Aunt Eleanor?" Eleanor set her gloves on the table. "I've watched Damien grow up. Ambition has always burned in him, but lately it's darkened into something else. I kept quiet for too long, hoping he'd change. But tonight, hearing the way he spoke to his cousin, I can't let you walk into this blind." She turned her sharp eyes on me. "Mr. Hale, you were right to be concerned. He doesn't respect what he can't control." The room went still. Clara looked from her aunt to me, shock written across her face. "So it's not just me," she whispered. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "It's not just you." Clara's hand gripped mine tightly. For the first time, I saw clarity breaking through her confusion. Doubt had become something more, a reckoning. After Eleanor left, Clara curled against me on the sofa like she hadn't since she was a child. Her voice was small, fragile. "Dad, what if I can't go through with it?" "Then you don't," I said simply. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite it." She buried her face in my shoulder. "I'm scared." "I know," I whispered. "But you're not alone." The clock on the mantel struck midnight, 12 steady chimes echoing through the room like a countdown. Each one carried the same truth. Tomorrow, the world would be watching. And tomorrow, Clara would have to choose. I held her until she fell asleep. Her breathing softened, but my eyes stayed open. On the mantel, Anna's photograph caught the glow of the lamp. I touched the chain under my shirt, felt the warmth of her ring, and promised again. Whatever comes, I'll keep her safe. Outside, the city hummed with its usual noise, indifferent to our storm. Inside, in the quiet of that old house, I knew the breaking point had arrived. The morning of the wedding broke sharp and cold, the kind of April day that tricks you with sunlight but cuts you with wind. I hadn't slept. The clock in my living room had ticked every second like a countdown to judgment. By the time dawn pushed through the blinds, I'd already pressed my navy suit, the one that had seen too many occasions and too many endings. When I fastened the chain around my neck, Anna's ring rested warm against my chest. I whispered to her photograph on the mantel, "Today, I keep my promise." The venue was called Eternal Gardens, all white chairs and flower arches heavy with blossoms. Guests shimmered in suits and dresses like cut jewels, laughter spilling across manicured lawns. I stayed at the edges. Men like Damien thrived in this world. Men like me moved through it like ghosts. And then Clara appeared. She wore Anna's wedding dress, altered but still carrying her mother's lace, her light. My throat tightened. Past and present, sewn together in silk. The officiant's voice rang out, clear and rehearsed. "Who gives this woman?" I stepped forward, chest tight. "I do." I placed Clara's hand into Damien's, and even then, I saw it. His grip wasn't a promise. It was a claim. The vows blurred past me. The kiss landed polite, hollow. Applause rose, controlled, as if the room was reminding itself of the script. The reception followed. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across tables set with linen white as snow. Waiters floated with trays of champagne. The band played songs no one really listened to. I found my place card at table 12. Far from the head table. On purpose. A placement designed to remind me where they thought I belonged. The speeches began. A cousin spoke too long. A groomsman tried a joke that no one laughed at. I stood to join another table when someone waved me over, a neighbor who'd driven from Brooklyn. I reached for my chair to slide it back under me. And it was gone. My knees buckled. My body pitched backward. The chandeliers above seemed to lean closer to watch. My back hit the polished floor hard enough to echo. For a breathless moment, silence. Then laughter. Cruel, scattered, like glass breaking across marble. Above me stood Damien, one hand still on the chair he had yanked away. His smile was a blade. "Oops," he said, voice too loud, too sharp. "Looks like someone's unsteady on his feet. Age catches us all." The room laughed again, thinner this time, uneasy. I didn't move. I let the silence stretch, let every eye feel the weight of what they had just seen. Then I planted my palm against the cold marble and rose, slow, deliberate, steady. The way a man rises after war, after grief, after life itself has tried to bury him. I set the chair upright with a scrape that cut through the music. I sat. But I didn't look at Damien. I looked at Clara. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. Her bouquet tilted until roses spilled across the floor. She covered her mouth with her hand. And in her eyes, for the first time, shame had turned into recognition. The silence deepened. Then boots crossed the marble. Deliberate. Steady. Richard Cross, Damien's father, moved through the crowd. His face was tight, his jaw hard. He stopped between me and his son. "Put the chair back," he said, voice low but carrying enough force to split the air. "Dad," Damien started. Richard didn't blink. "Now." Damien laughed. Brittle. It was a joke. A joke ends when one person isn't laughing. Richard's voice shook, not with fear but with fury. He turned toward me. "Captain Hale. I never thought I'd see the day you'd be humiliated by my own blood." The room gasped. Whispers spread like fire in dry grass. "Captain Hale? War? What's he talking about?" Damien froze. For the first time, the smirk slid off his face. "Dad, don't." But Richard wasn't listening to him. He was looking at me. This man carried me through fire when bullets fell like rain. I owe him my life. "And you," he spun on Damien, voice breaking, "you dare to dishonor him? To dishonor his daughter." The crowd shifted. Faces that had laughed seconds ago turned white. Clara's tears spilled, finally. She looked at me, then at Damien, then back. "Clara," I said, my voice steady, loud enough for every guest to hear. "A man who loves you will never mock your family. He will never see you as an asset. He will never call you an acquisition." The word landed like a hammer. Gasps filled the hall. Eleanor rose from her chair, her voice sharp as glass. "It's true. I've heard him say it myself." Now the whispers weren't whispers. They were roars. "Acquisition. Asset." Clara staggered back, staring at Damien. "Is it true?" Damien's mask cracked. "Clara, don't listen." Is it true? She demanded, louder, shaking. His silence was the answer. Her face broke. She ripped the ring from her finger, flung it across the floor. The sound of it skittering on marble was louder than the music had ever been. I will not be owned, she said, her voice steady now. Not by you. Not by anyone. The hall erupted. Guests stood, shouting, some in outrage, some in defense. Richard stepped between us, his hand gripping his son's arm. Enough, he barked. Damien tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. The crowd had already decided. The man who thought himself untouchable had been unmasked in front of everyone he had tried to impress. Clara turned to me, tears streaming, but her chin lifted high. She reached for my hand. I stood shoulders square, the old ache in my back forgotten. Together, we walked out, father and daughter, side by side, leaving Damien drowning in the wreckage of his own arrogance. Outside, the April wind cut sharp, but it carried something clean. Clara clung to me, trembling. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. You don't apologize for waking up, I said. You just keep walking. We stood there on the steps, the noise of the ruined reception spilling out behind us, and for the first time in years I felt Anna's presence so strong it was almost a hand on my shoulder. I touched the chain around my neck, the ring warm against my palm. I had kept my promise. Sometimes justice doesn't need fists. Sometimes it begins with a chair, and ends with the truth, spoken where lies can't hide.